Welcome to Clinically Speaking, the podcast that combines clinical insight with the chaos of reality TV, because somebody has to diagnose this drama.
For legal purposes, this is a joke. We would never diagnose someone who is not our client.
In this week's mini-sode, we will be defining some terms that you're probably familiar with but could be using incorrectly. To ease our listeners' minds, we are both licensed marriage and family therapists with master's degrees in marriage and family therapy.
Yes, this episode is not sponsored by ChatGPT.
No, ma'am. My bachelor's degree is in psychology, and I also had a less relevant major in French and Francophone studies.
I'm going to have to go to google.com later to find out what Francophone means. And I, Alex, have an undergraduate degree in psychology, sociology, and a certificate in gender studies. But not another major because I grew up in the Midwest, so you already know they were not funding the gender studies department. Boundaries. I often hear people say that boundaries are about telling someone what you want them to do. But clinically speaking, a boundary is a clear statement of what you will do in response to someone else's behavior, which is followed by consistently reinforcing it with your actions. Because sadly, we cannot control other people's actions. Otherwise, I'd have free tickets to Cowboy Carter. And an example of a boundary is saying to someone, if you pull out a guitar and start playing Push, like Ken in the Barbie movie, I will immediately get up and leave the premises.
And then you have to continually reinforce that boundary by walking away every time they bring out that guitar.
Yes, every time they whip it out, please, I need you guys to start lacing up your shoes immediately. Thanks. And if you guys are interested in learning more about boundaries, I would suggest following Casey Davis on TikTok. She's a licensed therapist and has great content about boundaries and how to set them.
Gaslighting. Gaslighting is commonly used to describe lying, guilt-tripping, or vague problematic behaviors, but it's much more complicated than that. And so I actually brought up the Merriam-Webster definition. So clinically speaking, gaslighting is psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, perception of reality, or memories, and typically leads to confusion, loss of confidence and self-esteem, uncertainty of one's emotional or mental stability, and a dependency on the perpetrator. So clinically speaking, it is an abuse and manipulation tactic that makes the victim question their reality or blame themselves for the perpetrator's actions.
And I think that is a nice segue into narcissism.
Yes.
Narcissism is not somebody being selfish or a bad partner, although it can be at times. Clinically speaking, narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is a part of the Cluster B personality disorders and the DSM, aka the Therapy Bible. If you're curious about the diagnostic criteria for NPD, you can find it online. With that being said, as our professors told us in graduate school, I don't know if you remember, Callie, please do not go diagnosing your loved ones. NPD should be diagnosed by a trained professional.
Thank you, very important.
PSA.
Red flags. People often use red flags to describe their personal icks, preferences, or deal breakers, but clinically speaking, a red flag is a warning sign for potentially harmful or abusive behavior in the future.
I agree. I would consider red flags to be behavior or comments made by someone that give them insight into underlying values or beliefs that someone could have, like patriarchal values, ideas about gender roles, things of that nature.
Totally. So, for example, a red flag is not being a Disney adult, although you may not like that. It is a red flag to identify with Sid from Toy Story.
And I would agree. And for all of my queers, I would say a red flag is not liking the L word, but it is liking Jenny Schechter.
I don't get the reference, but thank you so much.
I insert laugh track after this because the gays will understand.
Excellent. Validation. We often hear people try to validate others by literally stating, your feelings are valid, and thinking that's sufficient.
Shout out to our season 6 Love Island cast. That was their favorite line of the season.
Favorite. Constant. But clinically speaking, validating someone's emotions is about finding a way to communicate that their emotion makes sense given the situation, and to truly show empathy and understanding for them.
An example could be if I was talking to Serena, our Virgo queen, after the infamous dog scene. I might say to her, I know how much you care about Cordell, so seeing him bring back another woman to the casa must have been really hurtful for you.
Perfect example. Another important thing to note with validation is that you can validate the emotion someone is experiencing without agreeing with their beliefs or condoning their behavior. So we want to quickly differentiate thoughts, feelings, and actions because they're so often used interchangeably, but they are three distinct experiences. So thoughts are beliefs and ideas. I always say to my clients, if you can put it into a sentence, then it's probably a thought. Feelings are our emotions. It is a physiological, physical experience of something. And if it can be personified as a character in Inside Out, then I would say that's a feeling.
If you guys are in therapy, you might hear your therapist say, where do you feel that in your body?
Mm.
And that would be an example of feelings.
Actions are the things that we do and say. They're very observable, so if somebody else can see it or hear it, then that's probably an action or a behavior.
Now that you're familiar with some of the terminology, we'll all be clinically speaking. Yay!
If you guys have questions or suggestions about what terms to define next, you can email us at clinicallyspeakingpod@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram or TikTok at clinicallyspeakingpod. Make sure to listen for these terms as we recap Love Island USA Season 7. Our hope is to have Clinically Speaking episodes ready for you on Mondays before the next week of Love Island episodes start.
We are both full-time therapists, so you might need to practice some radical acceptance. Shout out to Marsha Linehan if we cannot get the episodes out to you promptly on Mondays, but we will do our best. We hope you enjoy listening as much as we enjoy making the episodes.
Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for our first recap episode.
As you all know, helping professionals are not raking in the big bucks, so please make sure to subscribe to Clinically Speaking in your podcast app and follow us at Clinically Speaking Pod on TikTok and Instagram.
This is an opportunity to discuss theoretical topics, but as always, we are not diagnosing any individuals, nor are we providing clinical treatment or recommendations. If you want to apply these concepts to your personal life, we encourage you to speak to a therapist in your area.